Nobody can say that he set out to hurt anyone. He hasn't been taken to the hearts of a lot of tennis fans. He's had a particularly rocky 2020. Djokovic was under pressure in the first set. He'd just fallen and jarred his shoulder and it had set him back. He was broken, and as he reacted to that disappointment, he hit a ball backwards without looking at where it was going, and it was a 100-to-1 shot, but it flew directly at the line judge and it landed in her throat, causing her obvious discomfort. She fell to the ground. She was kind of gasping for breath by the time that Djokovic was able to reach her and apologise, and you could see in her eyes that she was really struggling in that moment. I don't think the ball probably didn't do any lasting damage, but it was clearly a pretty frightening experience for her. Although there was a conversation that went on, it seemed like for 5 or 10 minutes, there wasn't an awful lot of doubt about the outcome, because there have been perhaps 3 high-profile incidences of things like this. Tim Henman was disqualified for hitting a ball girl in the head. David Nalbandian was disqualified for kicking a hoarding, which happened to have a line judge standing right behind it, who then had a wound in his shin. And most recently, in 2017, the Canadian player Denis Shapovalov whacked a ball in anger, which actually broke the eye socket of the chair umpire. The rule, I think, is independent of intent. It's not a question of what you're meaning to do, because none of those players intended to cause any damage. They were merely letting off steam. And if that does hurt an official, then the law is pretty black and white. You are going to be defaulted. In the immediate future, it doesn't really extend beyond this one tournament. He won't receive any of his prize money, which would have been a minimum of around £190,000, but he's probably worth getting on for $100 million anyway. He can probably afford to go without it. He doesn't receive any rankings points, but again, the peculiar circumstances of COVID mean that this tournament is in a peculiar place where players are allowed to retain their points from last year's US Open if they wish. So that doesn't actually affect him either. He'll have to pay a fine, again, probably $15,000 for not attending the press conference. The lasting question is how much this will affect his image. John McEnroe said overnight that it's a stain that he won't be able to wipe away. I don't know if it's going to be that much of a black mark, in the sense that it wasn't intentional. Nobody can say that he set out to hurt anyone. It was a extremely unfortunate accident. He's clearly going to be hurt by what happened. In the past, he's turned negatives into motivation, and some people will probably feel that he'll come back even stronger, using this as a kind of fuel. He's had a particularly rocky 2020 with his expressed views on anti-vaccination, with his Adria Tour event, which led to several players becoming infected with COVID, and even recently with the formation of a controversial players association. It's very sensitive times. So he's a man who remains something of a black sheep sometimes within the tennis family, despite the fact that he could well become the most successful player of all time. And definitely this event will play into that narrative. And if it had been Federer, I don't think that the on-court decision would have been any different, but the reaction from the media, the people, the fans, would have been probably a lot more forgiving. It should also be said that there was a trend for Novak to hit balls in anger. He had come quite close to this situation on a number of occasions, particularly in 2016. And one of the things about him is that he doesn't necessarily like to listen to outside opinions if he doesn't want to, and that's a characteristic of all great sports people throughout any sport. So that can sometimes be a disadvantage. I think if he'd listened to people who probably were telling him sooner or later this will get you in trouble, then he might have avoided this moment. Everyone was really expecting Novak Djokovic to win the men's title. He was a runaway favourite. He had 17 previous Grand Slams. The rest of the field have none between them. And that was a little bit predictable. But suddenly he's out, and now there's a whole bunch of young contenders all fighting for their first title, and the psychological effect on them is going to be quite interesting, because tennis is a sport where it's quite difficult to play under pressure. The generation of power requires a loose arm, and I think it's going to be an interesting petri dish to see how these young players react to the fact that suddenly there's a major title. It's within reach, and there hasn't been a new champion at a major in men's tennis in 2014, so it's a big prize at stake.